kind of close up the city council, part of that zoning, entered into a questionable request through public records request before we got into litigation. That's what it was email between the council members, all the members discussing what they were going to discuss at the meeting or what they had discussed, and even saying, well, since this is an email, this isn't a meeting, so we don't have to tell anybody. And in fact, about 6 months before they turned those emails over to us, there was a case in the Ohio Supreme Court called White versus King. This is hopefully, I think Ohio for many years had a model law for public access to information, open meetings, sunshine, so open access to records, open access to meetings. And little by little, the courts kind of made it out of unfortunately, there's a particularly horrendous decision on Hamilton County Court of Appeals not too many years ago. But in White v. King, the Ohio Supreme Court brought it, came back and said, emails now are a meeting. They've said, a public meeting is, a pre-arranged meeting of the majority of the body. So we have a city council and 7 members, let's say. So 4 members agreed to meet tomorrow at White Castle. And then they have to deliberate on public information. And the Hamilton County Court of Appeals a few years ago said deliberation is carefully weighing and considering all of the factors. And you start to read their definition, you think, I don't know that a city council has ever deliberated based on how exacting they get. But they've gone back and they said, no, if you start these email chains, those are public meetings, and those are illegal public meetings because they weren't pre-announced to the public. The public couldn't attend them. And so we were able to stop that. And what we did in this case with Milford, we brought suit. We said, we went through the meeting minutes and the public records that Mr. Richardson brought us. We said, they elect their mayor. The city council is elected 7 members, and then the council members elect the mayor and vice mayor. And how they elect the mayor and vice mayor is through a secret ballot. We said that's not allowed in Ohio. And candidly, there's some question. There's not exact case law one way or the other, and the statutes are a little unclear, but there's what's called an attorney general's opinion that says you have to make a vote on a mayor and vice mayor in these leadership positions in an open vote. So that was one of the issues we sued over. And we sued over these illegal executive sessions. And we called them early and said, look, just admit what you did, and let's get the injunction, because what you end up getting is an injunctive relief, so telling them they have to obey the law going forward, a $500 per violation to the plaintiff. And in this case, she said she's going to take her $500 and give it to a local charity for children's services. And then attorney's fees. We don't want to make this, out of a molehill here. Let's just resolve this. And they wanted to fight. So they filed a motion to exclude us from learning more. And they said, you can't ask us about what was said in these illegal executive sessions because executive sessions are themselves privileged. And we said, wait a minute, there's no law that says that. And in fact, we found a case from 2012 where the same attorney representing Milford argued the same argument to the same judge, Judge McBride out in Claremont County. And Judge McBride in 2012 said, nonsense. We said, Your Honor, you've already decided this. You told him in 2012 it's nonsense. It's just as much nonsense now. And by the way, they should have told you about this decision. When you, as an attorney, you have to tell the judge when there's a decision that's bad for you. So the judge issued a 30-page decision, which is unheard of. I mean, it was, and he broke it down. I mean, just so eloquently, and it was really let them know that we are going to have access to these executive sessions, or they're going to forfeit the case, essentially. So, if you're going to not discuss it, you're just going to admit that you lost, essentially. So with that in mind, we were able to get it resolved. The case was able to settle. But by that time, we had a number of hours in the case arguing this issue. So The settlement, and let me pull up the settlement. I'm just going to read you some of the things that what they ultimately agreed to do. They agreed, to have open elections on the mayor and city council and vice mayor. They agreed that with emails, what we found they were doing was the mayor was using her personal email account for public business, and then when the public records request was made, she wouldn't turn over those personal email accounts. So we said from now on, if someone emails a city council member or the mayor about public business to your personal email account, you have to forward that email to your public email account and respond from there. And that way, it's very easily accessible in a public records request. And important to note is, just because you use a personal email doesn't mean it's not a public record. It just makes it more difficult for us to ultimately deal with. But they agreed to comply with the law going forward. They agreed to an injunction. And in fact, the ultimate relief can be, if they violate this injunction, they could be, in fact, removed from office for violating the injunction. So I think we had a serious and real victory for the people of Milford going forward. They're going to have access to this. And I think because of the decision on the discovery issue, quite frankly, I think it's a good decision going forward for other cases. Ultimately, the important thing I think to note is, while we weren't representing a newspaper, Ms. Richardson, as a former reporter, and I think sometimes she does some string reporting work still, it shows the value of the newspapers in general and media and the access to get public information about what's going on in your city. So I appreciate what the Enquirer does here in our community in general, for the most part. We always have our quibbles, but it is important work they do. Jack Greiner, that handles the litigation for a lot of the work for the Enquirer, had a big case recently against Blue Ash as well. I think it's an important case. And that one was one where the city of Blue Ash actually hired an outside consultant to conduct interviews to assess their employees. But they never never had the city council members never received the reports. And they said, well, wait a minute, you spent $25,000, $30,000 on a report that you never got? And Blue Ash said, well, it's not a public record if we never got it. He said, well, no, I think, and Jack argued and won that we get to see what you paid $25,000 for, whether you look at it or not. So there is important work being done by the Enquirer and other media, and by citizen activists. And I encourage all of you in your communities, as you see things that you need to know more about and dig in, make public records requests. Certainly, don't let that first stumbling block stop you from getting any further. With that,
let's thank our guest Brian Schrock for coming tonight. Thank you so much, Brian. And now that we've got you here, maybe you'll teach the class next year for us. Yeah. So, a little bit of history about the Enquirer. I ran across this in the archives. I'll show this to our guest. I don't know if you are aware of who that is, John R. McClain. I don't know how we found this. One of our people had known we were going to have this session tonight, so I thought it was kind of interesting. So the Enquirer, if I can read this, it's kind of small. The Enquirer, okay, so a number of newspapers were published in Cincinnati, Ohio during the first half of the 19th century. The Cincinnati Enquirer began publishing a daily newspaper on April 10th, 1841. At that time, the paper was not published on Sundays. The Enquirer became one of the first newspapers in the United States to publish a Sunday edition on April 20th, 1848. From the beginning and for much of its history, the newspaper generally reflected the views of the Democratic Party. And John McClain, who's the gentleman who's pictured here, his family owned the Enquirer for most of the earliest 20th century. I'm a big Enquirer reader. I've been reading the Enquirer forever. I think I've been back here 1991. That's 26 years. I've got this really long driveway, And every morning, my wife lays in bed and says, "You go out and get the newspaper." And Dr. Rissover knows my wife. I do it. Um, and so it was during the kind of the prelude to the election, I just got concerned that I didn't feel that the coverage that I was reading every morning was really accurate. So I sat down with the executive brain trust of EmpowerU, which is a lot of people, Nita, Amy, some other people, and we decided to kind of keep count of the newspaper for the 14 days running up to the election. So what we did was, pardon us, every day we went through every single page of the paper, and Andy, if you could put up that graph, and what we did was we measured every single article that had to do with Hillary Clinton or with Donald Trump, and we chronicled it for 14 days. Now, it's not kind of like we kind of looked at it. It's kind of like we measured every single article, inch by inch by inch, okay? So and I watched the person do it, okay? And the results are in this box, okay? So, there might have been a little mistake here, a little mistake there, but I checked a lot of it. I felt like it was accurate. So what we found was that throughout the course of the 14 days up to the general election, in our calculations, about 74% of the articles favored Hillary Clinton, and about 26% of the articles favored Donald Trump. And then there were about 917 inches of articles. This was all column inches. We couldn't really determine who it was favoring, if anyone. And so that was the basis of a session we had with Jack Atherton that I think some of you attended in the fall, and a series of emails we started writing about bias in the media, which was really, those emails were read by more people than anything we've ever sent out, and that's why I know this topic is so important to so many of you, and that's why I'm so appreciative of our guests for coming tonight. So with that in mind, and I'm just going to ask Peter, you don't have to address this, but if you can incorporate it into your remarks, that's great. I want to our guest is just so accomplished. Peter Bhatia is a multiple Pulitzer Prize-winning editor who has spearheaded meaningful journalism and digital advances at numerous news sites across the country. He's the editor and vice president of audience engagement at Enquirer Media. He joined the Enquirer in August 2015. Battea was the director of Reynolds National Center for Business Journalism at Arizona State's Cronkite School of Journalism. His resume includes leading newsrooms that won 9 Pulitzer Prizes, including 6 in Portland. He's a 6-time Pulitzer juror. He's also a leader in journalism education. Peter lives in OTR with his wife, Liz, and Batman, their Chihuahua, and they have 2 grown children. We're really glad to have Peter here today. And I would only ask that as we start to ask questions, we have some people online tonight. Hello, everyone. Sorry we forgot to change the date on the program, but I'm glad you could join us. And if you would just make sure to ask your question in the microphone. Let's welcome our guest, Peter Bhatia.
Thank you. It's very nice. I appreciate it. So you can hear me? Yeah, I can hear myself. Wow. Hello, hello, hello. Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to talk with you. I've got to rewrite my bio to get the silly dog out of there. But everybody wants to hear about Batman, my Chihuahua, and he's kind of a goofy little guy. In fact, I stopped at home on the way from work to take him out to Washington Park for a little walk because the poor guy's been in his crate all day while I've been in an all-day meeting. But I want to try to talk, and oh, there you are. Oh, thanks. You'll keep me on. You'll wave at me if I'm going on too long, because I'm sure the Q&A will be really probably the most valuable part of the evening. Let me start by talking about the open records thing, because that's a particular passion of mine that really existed long before Cincinnati. One of the things, as many of you know, when you've worked in your career or in your industry for a long time, I've been in journalism for 42 years. And when I came out of college in 1975, I went to work as a reporter. And all I really ever wanted to be was a reporter. I wanted to have the opportunity to travel the world and be a correspondent. And my father was an immigrant from India, so my dream as a young journalist was to someday be the LA Times or the New York Times correspondent in Delhi. Been to Delhi several times, but never as a reporter, because I got dragged into leadership roles early on, which turned out okay. It wasn't what I wanted to do, but it's still journalism. It's just leading journalists instead of actually doing the reporting. My first love as a reporter was political journalism. When I was a kid reporter in Spokane, Washington, which is about 80 miles north of the little college town Pullman that I grew up in Washington State. When I was a very, very young, very, very green, really didn't know what I was doing reporter, the paper sent me to cover the state legislature in Olympia because they decided they needed an extra reporter there instead of the regular guy, or in addition to the regular guy. And they sent me because I was the only one on the staff who was either single or male. Because in 1976 or whatever it was, 5, I guess, you know, it sounds silly now, but they weren't going to send a single woman off to Olympia, the other side of the state, and so on. So they sent me as the junior guy. And I really had no idea what I was doing, so I just wrote a lot of stories and really started to learn about political journalism. When I came back to Spokane later, I got to do some more political journalism, and I actually did some of the first stories for that paper. This tells you how long it was ago, about a rising candidate and this burgeoning conservative movement in the Republican Party around this former governor from California, and actually wrote some of the first stories for the Spokane paper on the rise of Ronald Reagan's popularity and the sort of galvanizing around him. So anyway, back to records for a moment. You know, I'm really privileged and happy that I work for a company that will fight for open records, that will spend the money, because it's not cheap to, especially when you take court cases all the way through the appellate process. We've had 2 cases in the last year go all the way to the Supreme Court. We've got another case right now that's going before the Supreme Court. And it's motivated by a strong passion to be the public's eyes and ears, to do the things that an ordinary citizen cannot do, because an ordinary citizen isn't necessarily going to be able to spend the money or take the time or you know, have the legal expertise or whatever it might be to take cases through the legal process. So, for example, we just kind of won. We basically won the first case before the Supreme Court on the use of body cams and dash cams by police officers, which we feel very, very strongly is a public record under the laws of Ohio. There's this thing in Ohio, and you'll correct me if I get this wrong, but there's this thing in Ohio called the Clear Exemption, which stands for Confidential Law Enforcement Investigative Record. And law enforcement agencies, prosecutors will use the Clear Exemption to say, no, we can't release that because it's still an investigation. And that argument was being used on body cameras. Well, our argument was, well, wait a minute, the body camera records an incident, records what's going on. So it's no different than a police officer writing a report on the scene. It's just a visual record. There can't be an investigation until something's happened. So the body camera arguably is the public's business. And most law enforcement people will argue, at least the chiefs, the rank and file may not feel quite the same way. And evidence seems to be finding this to be true, that of course body cameras show police doing their work professionally and appropriately the vast majority of the time. Our argument again then is that we should be able to see those things. And of course, on some of the controversial cases, at least in Cincinnati in recent years, the DuBose Tensing case, the body camera was huge in terms of that. We fought for the records to be released on the Sonny Kim shooting, not because we wanted to sensationalize Officer Kim's death because we wanted to make sure that the accounts of what happened were true. And right now we're fighting for the autopsy reports from the Pike County killings, which happened to be a year old this week, because the law in Ohio very clearly states that autopsy reports are public record. The prosecutor, the AG, the Attorney General, the sheriff are using the clear exemption to try to deny us. And we may win, we may lose. It's an open. It's not based on the findings so far. It's not clear exactly what's going to happen, but it is clear that we have to keep fighting for these things, for things that are, sort of, if you'll pardon the expression, a little bit silly, like the Milford case. I mean, what were they thinking? This is not complicated law. To other things, so we can hold our institutions accountable. It's so important to what we do. And I get grief from time to time because I'm spending too much on legal fees. But again, the company is really supportive of me, and I'm very grateful for that. If you hear about things that don't feel right or appear to be violations of open records law or public documents that are being withheld, let us know. We'll look into it. Yes, we focus on bigger things, but my view is open records are open records, and we have the wherewithal to look into things, so we will. So that's my sermon on open records. Thank you for tolerating it, but it's really important. So let me talk about politics, the last election, bias, and so on. I teach journalism ethics, and I just, in fact, finished a seminar for seniors at the University of Cincinnati last class of the semester on, and one of the things I spend a lot of time in the course of the semester talking about is bias. And what's so interesting and often difficult with issues of bias is that I've yet to meet a human being who's not biased in some way. We're all biased. We're all products of our environment, of our education, of the way we were raised, what we do for a living, where we live, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody has biases. And it's impossible to wash it out of an individual or out of a society. Even the greatest of arbiters and judges and so on have bias because they're human beings. So over the years, the model for journalism that sort of emerged in this country after, sort of between World War I and World War II, after this sort of yellow journalism days of the 20s and 30s, when the Hearsts and the Pulitzers were reigning supreme in American journalism, there was sort of this movement that grew up around so-called objectivity. And it was never really a proper term or a correct application because, again, there's no such thing as an objective human being either, for the same reason there's no such thing as anybody who doesn't have biases of one sort or another. So I long ago, and tell my students this, I long ago sort of abandoned the notion of objectivity. Not fairness, not completeness, not balance, not truth-telling, but the idea of being objective in any situation is impossible for humans. And it's just as impossible for journalists as it is for anyone else. We're all affected by what we encounter. And our history is full of examples of that in society and journalism and other ways. So the way my generation of journalists, at least, was trained was to be prepared to go into any situation and to document what's going on, to find the truth in what the situation entails, and then report that. That has gotten to be, in the last decade or so, incredibly difficult. As our society has become more polarized, as the notion of actually having meaningful conversation with people on the issues of the day, whatever they might be, becomes more and more difficult, and fueled to a huge degree by the polarization that has gone on in media as well. The growth of the talking heads on cable, the wave of shows of people yelling at each other that has sort of given way a little bit now. Now we just get drowned in pundits of one sort or another, and they're trying to balance the left against the right, and they end up basically not saying very much. And of course, with the growth of partisan media on the left and on the right, the search for truth, whatever that may be for people, has become harder and harder. Because if people really just want to have their points of view affirmed, they can turn on the TV set or turn on the radio and hear that perspective just played back to them. And a big result of that has been, in my judgment, for what it's worth, a decline in civil discourse in our society, and that's really a shame. All the dysfunction in Congress over the last, I don't know how long, 20 years probably, back to the Clinton administration, I guess, is exemplary of the fact that as a society we've lost our way a little bit, and that civil dialogue and the ability to work around issues and to find solutions that benefit ultimately the American people has declined dramatically. And it's who wins and who loses, not what's best for the country, and that's just a shame. And journalism's in the middle of that, trying to sort it all out. It's become incredibly complicated. For those of us who try to live in the middle, if you will, who aren't trying to take a partisan stand one way or another, who are just trying to find the facts and report them, it's incredibly difficult. Because, from a simple functional reason, it's hard to get people to talk to us in the way they used to talk to us. It's hard to have good, in-depth conversations. We manage, but it's harder than it used to be. And it doesn't matter what you write, you're going to get attacked one way or another, either on social media or in the comments on the website or on the radio or on TV or whatever the case might be. And depending on where you live, it could be both sides of the political spectrum or one side of the political spectrum or the other. I lived in Oregon for a long time. I found the left to be much nastier than the right in Oregon. Now, that may be because the right had given up in Oregon, because it's, along with that, what the West Coast swath is very Democrat dominated. And here it's been more from the right. And I can't tell you it's been particularly civil. At times it's been downright depressing. At times it's kind of amusing. Like the guy who in one paragraph and 2 sentences of a letter compared me to Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and Lenin, which I thought was wonderful. His appreciation of history may be a little bit off, although they were all autocrats in their own ways. But it's like, really? Can we just talk about things? Tell me what's bothering you instead of calling me names. So anyway, it's incredibly difficult. I thought I'd share with you some of what, I hope this is readable for everybody, some of what I share with my students, because I try to walk them through and really get them to think about what bias means in a news story, and keeping in mind that bias is always in the eye of the beholder. Two people can read the same story and have completely different reactions to it, and it happens all the time. To me, I'll get, it used to be phone calls, now it's emails. Get an email saying one thing about a story, and 30 seconds later, another email pops into my mailbox that says something completely opposite. And typically, it has to do with ideology of one sort or another. But I'm fond of the writings by a guy named Andrew Klein, who's a professor at Missouri State. And, he is very outspoken on these things, and I think puts it into a really effective context. I really like the third bullet. Bias is a small world that identifies the collective influence of an entire message, which is sort of a complicated phrase, but is kind of wise in many ways. And again, of course, he echoes the what I see is, which is that there's no such thing as an objective point of view. He says some things that I think are very wise about the way that the press works, and that and offers tips that I think are very smart, and that I asked my students to think about. I said, okay, when you're reading a story, you need to be a critical reader. You need to be willing to ask questions about the story, regardless of what it's about. It probably matters a lot less if it's an account of whether the Reds won or lost than it is about major issues of the day. You know, take your pick. Is the streetcar a boondoggle? Et cetera, et cetera. I probably just showed my bias on the streetcar matter, but I will admit I'm out walking my dog late at night in Washington Park, and I watch empty streetcar after empty streetcar go by, and I'm sort of going, and I'm saying to myself as a citizen, how much did we spend on this? But anyway, it was a lot, right? So these kinds of things are really important in terms of looking at news and you know, satisfying yourself that what you're getting meets your criteria for fairness ultimately. And again, the last thing I would ever try to tell you is that any journalist doesn't have bias. Of course they do. For all the reasons I mentioned earlier: background, education, experience, length of time in a community, where they grew up, where they went to school, where they've worked before, their socioeconomic status, their family status, who their parents are or were, et cetera, et cetera. You know, did they grow up in an affluent way or in a less affluent way? You know, or did they grow up in poverty? How does that all play out? But there's sort of biases that come through that I think are really an important part of confronting in newsrooms and making sure that we do everything that we can. You know, for example, number 5, the narrative bias. Over the last, I don't know, couple of generations, narrative storytelling, literary techniques have become really common in journalism. And, you know, it's a great way to tell a story. We had the nice narrative on Sunday about Baldwin pianos and their origins here in Cincinnati, which I actually had somebody talk to me and argue with me that you can't ever compare a Baldwin to a Steinway. It's like, okay, you're an expert, I'm not. I gave a piano in 8th grade and I was terrible. I still feel bad for Amanda Just. I remember her name, my piano teacher, why she tolerated me, I have no idea, because I was terrible and I didn't practice enough. So, you know, there's always a bias towards bad news because good news is boring. And some of that is true. You know, it's an old journalism joke and cliche that it's not news when the plane lands safely. And, you know, it's not. And most of life goes on normally and so on, and that's not news. When bad news happens in one sort or another, that's news and we race after it. So, you know, those are very, very much a part of what drives journalism, and it's why I always tell people you must be a discerning consumer of news. Other things. Number 8 is really important right now because of, I thought you were trying to take a picture of the screen. That was dancing. Sorry to get out of the way. Right now, because in the era of digital media and social media, you know, when I came up in the business, the idea was, hey, you got a scoop, and it was good for at least a day because, you know, it came out in the paper in the morning, the TV stations couldn't match it at night, and usually they couldn't match it anyway, so the scoop would last for a while. Now a scoop lasts about 30 seconds because as soon as you report your scoop and you report it in real time, you don't wait for the next morning's paper. If you find out, if you finish the story at 10 in the morning, it goes on the website at 10 in the morning, then somebody else is going to match it, or minimally they're going to link to your story and kind of steal your audience over to their site if they can. So And of course, in social media, especially on Twitter, with 140 characters, stuff gets thrown out constantly all the time, and a lot of the time it's wrong, which is a huge contemporary ethical problem within our field. So there are all these other kinds of biases that manifest themselves, and I spend a lot of time in class, walking my students through this and trying to help them understand how they have to confront that as they go forward if they decide to be journalists. The other piece that I thought I'd share is this is from my friend Bob Steele, who's a now retired journalism ethicist, and really probably the best one we've ever had in our business. And that's, it's always been part of journalism that as a reporter, you should be able to walk into any situation and cover the story and do it fairly, whatever it is, even if it strongly conflicts with your personal belief system in some fashion. I think we have to be better than that, or be more sensitive about that than in general is the case. That why would we put somebody in a really uncomfortable position if we're sending them to cover a story and that might conflict with their religious beliefs or their personal beliefs, or put them in a position of interviewing somebody they know in a difficult position, or whatever the case might be. I think we've gotten better at that over time, and realize that human beings are human beings, and again, even though we're trained to be able to cover just about anything, I think I could still walk in. I could cover everything from a Bernie Sanders rally to a Tea Party meeting, and not feel awkward about it either way. In fact, both would be fun. And I may say more about me than anything else, but our job is hard enough that we have to try to bring together complex facts and report on them in a way that's coherent and that's fair. So putting people in awkward positions like that is something that we've gotten past. So yes. Hi, Rose. I don't know that it's my position to judge that.
Well, you said from Bernie Sanders to the Tea Party.
Well, I know a lot
So
of Democrats who
from
think.
one extreme to the other extreme.
Yeah, I know some Democrats who don't think Bernie is particularly far left. They're way left of him. So I'm just using that as an example. But there are certainly far more radical conservative views than those carried by the Tea Party.
Thank you.
All right, the hands are going up, so I guess I'll
No,
stop and
I want you to finish if you have any more statements, and then we'll take questions. So please don't let us interrupt you.
So I did want to talk a little bit about the campaign last year, and I can sit here and tell you with complete comfort that I'm proud of the work that we did on the campaign last year. If anybody was reading the Enquirer over last fall, and they would not have been surprised by the surge for Donald Trump in this state. We were out all over the state. We wrote a series that ran in October. I think that was called Anxious Ohio or something like that, that was out in Appalachia, that was out in the country of the state, and talked about people being angry and upset and disillusioned. And when now the president, of course, was here in October in Cincinnati, we had a task force of people interviewing people and covering the rally in US Bank Arena. In fact, I was there myself because I wanted to appreciate it with my own eyes. And literally we're all over the state talking to voters and reporting on what was happening. I don't think anybody who was reading our paper every day would have been surprised that Trump won Ohio. Personally, I was surprised it was as wide a margin as it was. But as we now know and as well established, the polls were wrong, or they certainly didn't capture the surge for Trump in the fall last year. So, you know, I feel like we were out there and we were doing our job and we were covering what mattered to people who lived here. And I still believe that. I mean, my instructions to my staff were find out what's going on in Ohio and write about it. And that's what they did. Did we make mistakes along the way? Of course. You know, there's no such thing as perfection in journalism. You know that when you read the paper and see typos in it, which, believe me, drives me absolutely batty, to borrow my dog's name. But you know, I work with really talented, really highly motivated journalists who want to and endeavor every day to tell the truth. And the thing about truth in today's society, I mean, I can look them in the eye and ask them, did you capture the full perspective of what this story is about? And if they can't say yes to me, now I don't ask everybody that question. You know, I certainly don't ask a sports writer covering a basketball game or something. But if I can look them in the eye and they can answer my questions about how did you get the story, what's the reporting you did, I always ask, could the opposite be true? And you know, sort of either myself or more often our editors are doing what I call prosecutorial editing, that by the time we publish something, we have a high comfort level that what we're writing is truthful. And I respect completely that a lot of people don't see it that way, but like I said, there's no such thing as an unbiased human being. So I'll stop there, and we can, since people already had
Thank you.
Numerous questions.
We've got the first question right here. If you'd be kind enough when you get the mic to say your first name and hold the mic very close to your mouth. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeff Capel.
Hi, Jeff.
First, just a quick throwaway statement. Please stop covering economic impact studies as if they're valid. They're the junk science of economics, and 2 or 3 minutes of research will prove that. But my real question is, you mentioned that you guys tried not to be unbalanced in the presidential race. But what I saw is anytime Donald Trump would say or do anything stupid or was caught in a scandal, you guys would quickly run an article asking every Republican from Rob Portman all the way down, do they stand behind Trump? Do you endorse Trump? Do you still endorse Trump? Yet when Hillary Clinton would say or do something stupid or get caught in a scandal, we never saw that same article. So my question is, why do you guys believe that Republicans are responsible for what Donald Trump does, but Democrats are not responsible for what Hillary Clinton does?
Well, thank you for your question. I don't think that's true. First of all, we didn't every time Trump said something or did something go to every Republican in the state and say, what do you think? We did have, and still have, a governor who, of course, ran for president and opposed Mr. Trump and still does. I think his book is coming out next week. I think it's next week. And I don't know what's in his book, but it's supposedly his statement of his philosophies. So one expects there'll be some differentiation from the president on the issues because that's what he ran on. But you know, there are differences in the campaigns and there are differences in the candidates. Rose or somebody asked me at another speaking engagement why we didn't cover Benghazi, the Clinton Foundation, and one other that I'm not remembering right now. Sorry? No, it wasn't Fast and Furious because that didn't really have anything to do with Hillary, but I can't remember what the other one was. When in fact, of course, they were covered in great detail in the paper and by media across the country. So the differences in the campaigns, I think, and the fact that President Trump was breaking new ground almost every day led to more episodic coverage. But when Hillary made the basket of deplorables comment, that was all over the media. That was all over the paper. And she paid for it.
We have a question right here.
Sorry.
Okay, how's this? Yeah, just a personal observation. I've been following the Clintons for 40 years through the Whitewater scandal back in Arkansas. And I have a relative that attended University of Southern California. Southern California is one of the 3 schools that all the journalists, the TV stations, and the major news media get their students from.
That's not true, but go on.
Okay, well anyways, that's what.
It's a wonderful
because
journalism school, but there are hundreds of them.
Yeah, she researched, and those are the schools you can guarantee to get a job. But she told me that it was absolutely not appropriate to say anything good about America, or about the Constitution being viable, or about a free society in America. You kept your mouth shut if you didn't agree with all the professors that would just indoctrinate you on how bad America is. The Constitution is no good. America is the fault of the whole world. And this constant barrage. But all the conservatives in the classes knew to keep their mouths shut because they would not pass the course.
Well, I can't comment on the journalism school at USC. I happen to think USC is a second-rate institution, but that's because I went to Stanford. So, there are rivals, and by the way, we've been killing them in football lately. But, the fact is that I sincerely doubt that. I don't know. I mean, I'm not calling anybody a liar, but we work in the only profit-making industry that is protected by the Constitution. The 49 words of the First Amendment, which I think are the most important words in the First Amendment because it guarantees our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, our freedom of the press, our right to assembly, the right to petition the government for grievances, which, by the way, I made both my children memorize before they were 5 years old. They thought their dad was I probably should have been arrested for it, but they can both still quote the First Amendment, and I'm very proud of my kids. They're 27 and 31 now. And, that same First Amendment protects academic speech, too. It protects political speech. It protects, television show pundits. It protects everybody from Rush Limbaugh to whoever the
like the
equivalent
riots
on the
in
left is.
California at the universities where they wouldn't let speakers talk. Does the First Amendment protect them? I don't think that. The universities don't protect the speakers. My personal view is Cal bungled that. But being a Stanford guy, you can imagine what I think of Cal. But anyway, and I thought I saw a headline on the way here today that Ed Coulter was supposed to speak at Cal and they weren't going to let her speak. And okay, you can think what you want about Ann Coulter. I don't care. I actually think she's very entertaining. But that's wrong. Well, Well, another point, I do write conservative articles. You do print them once in a while. Once for every 10 articles you get on the liberal side, you print one conservative letter to the editor. So, but every time I have sent an article in, I get nasty letters from the liberals, and they send me all these articles about how stupid conservatives, how bad Trump is, how bad this is, and I think
and every time we print a letter or an op-ed from a liberal, they get letters pillaring them from conservatives. Well, which is my whole point about the lack of civil discourse.
But that's one thing I'm thinking maybe you get so much flack from the liberals by coinciding or saying something good about conservatives that you're afraid, you're actually cowardly to print anything conservative because the liberals are so drastic. They have riots, they march in the streets, they threaten you with death. So you probably don't want to offend the liberals, but it's okay to offend the conservatives because we're very meek and mild and we believe in the democracy.
Not the conservatives I know. They're pretty outspoken in their views. Nobody's threatened my well-being. The editor of our paper in Phoenix had death threats when they endorsed Hillary. But nobody's ever threatened my well-being, and why would they? I'm almost 64. What are they going to do to me? I love your hat, by the way. That's just really classy.
Bought this downtown Cincinnati Paragon hat some 28 years ago. It's long gone, but Battea's downtown. You can get a good hat there.
I really need to go there. I go by it every day, and I keep needing to go in.
Yeah, and the guy who runs it, he's amazing.
Everybody's told me that. I got to meet him while he's still in business. Sorry.
So
sidebar hat conversation. Hat guys talking. Excuse me.
Yeah. So I'm Dr. J. I want to say something maybe non-political. There's something a state politician did that I thought was fantastic, and the Enquirer dutifully reported on it. And then I expected follow-up articles from the Enquirer, and it kind of just disappeared into the sink of ink. Treasurer Josh Mandel with his Ohio checkbook and Open Ohio, where every single expenditure by the state of Ohio is open to all of us to look at. What I was hoping for was a series of investigative articles from the Enquirer. You'd sick your journalists on it, and they go look at the Strickland administration, at the Kasich administration, how money was spent, and you just got to be able to find some smoking guns somewhere. So what happened with all of that? Is it
I don't know.
completely useless? You know what I'm talking about, of course.
Yeah, I'll ask our Capitol people about it. I don't know what happened to that.
I mean, I know it's up and it's running, but we've just never got an article out of the Enquirer saying, look what we found. And it's been up years now, a year and a half, 2 years.
I'll ask about that. I don't know the history of it. Or
let me just say, you support that, don't you? Isn't that like an amazing thing that the taxpayers actually see how the money is spent?
I support anything meaningful. It's really easy to, under the guise of open records, do something that actually doesn't, or that. Sorry, I hope that wasn't me. My beard scratching the mic.
Where's the NSA?
That was the NSA. Yeah. Thank you. Sometimes there are bad bills that sort of purport to open things up, but really close them. And but the whole notion of making public records, especially public spending, more accessible is something we completely support. There's a new website in Arizona that does that, and actually the head of the Ohio News Association and I have talked about trying to figure out how to do something like that. It's more about open records than government spending, but trying to figure out how to do something like that for Ohio.
Well, just a follow-up to that, as I understand it, Treasurer Mandel tried to get it passed through the legislature, and it wouldn't pass. As I understand it, the governor opposed to it. So he just decided to do it as an initiative as the treasurer.
Yeah.
So, if it's not workable, I mean, heck,
Have to
make it workable. He wants it to happen, as I'm under the impression. Maybe it's all just, a political thing. I mean, I guess they all are, but at least it's going in the direction you seem to be interested in, and frankly, I think all of us are interested in too. We got
I think
at least even attempts to go to make things open to the public.
One of the things we're completely committed to, and you see it in our work, is that we're constantly rooting out records and fighting for records. That's how we found the sewer spending scandal. Nothing sexy about sewer spending scandals, right? It's hard. Yeah, exactly. Boy, did we make that joke a lot. That sewer spending, it stinks. And the behavior of the Parks Board, for example. Lately, some suspect spending of public monies by health agencies that are supposed to be funneling that money to the benefit of citizens and so on. And we take some heat for that because everything has a constituency. And, it might be a minority community, it might be the elite community of town, depending on what it is. But we continue to be relentless about that because, if we don't dig into that stuff for the public, nobody's going to. Nobody would have known that there was $680 million in questionable sewer spending. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
When I saw this program, it looked like the greatest opportunity I could have found at this time. I've had a relationship with community press newspapers for 47 years, known every editor when they started off in Norwood on Montgomery Road. A lot of great people working in that publication. Ours in Bethea is a suburban life. I gave you a letter and some other documents that actually I've been exchanging with you and several other people that report to you. And my concern, and I think this fits in a little different angle, bias in the media. My concern is, for all the reasons, some that you talked about tonight, financial and other, that you may, the Enquirer concerning me a lot. That the Enquirer out in our community, we talk about Milford, Loveland, and I'm from Madeira for 47 years, very involved in the politics. I absolutely beginning to think in the letter that you have, this is what it says in the letter, and you and I have had, again, exchanges of emails. So I'm really concerned that the Enquirer, for whatever the reasons, that right now the bias with your paper and out in our communities, the bias leans a little more favorably towards the local politicians.
You mean the office holders, the incumbents?
Absolutely. And my situation is that it's reached a point where I think it was biased. your lack of coverage on issues in our community. I think it may be in other communities, but at some point, the paper actually ends up covering up issues, things that are really wrong going on in our communities. And that's really why I'm here tonight. I wanted you to be aware of it. Got the documents that I've emailed, and I can tell you, you know all the names, Killian, Maloney, reporter, and everything's being covered up in Madeira. And
Well,
I look at that as bias.
I understand that. It's not bias, it's just resources. We have a fraction of the people that we once had. And I wish it was otherwise, but it's the economics of our business. Yeah.
Website 10 pages long, and I'm going to report on my website why it is that you can't, why it is that there is this bias leaning way further, and I'm going to write a story on my website according to what you just said. If you and I
God bless the First Amendment. It allows you to do that.
Could I elaborate on that? So, Mr. Oppenheimer, is your question that most of the coverage in the community newspapers is all positive? Is that your question?
I think that it's more recent. It wasn't this way 5 years ago or 10 or 30 or 40 years ago. The coverage up until recently was not that way. And now it is really more what's favorable for the local politicians is what we're seeing in the paper.
That's an interesting point of view. It's not a matter of bias. It's a matter, we don't have anybody to cover Madeira full time. We did go after the city council and the leadership in Blue Ash, and we won on that, and which one of the most interesting parts of our community, I think, just the way it's exploded.
Hi,
Yes,
my
ma'am.
name's Leslie. Thanks for coming to address
Of
us
course.
here at EmpowerU. And I think one of the things that the founding fathers could not envision was a press that was not free. So my question to you is, in an age when our local newspapers have been gobbled up and merged with other papers and now owned by conglomerates who are run by people who tend to lean to the left, can we really have a free press anymore? You've admitted bias. Didn't really talk about truth as much, but can we really have a free press when the press is owned by just a few?
Well, the press is still owned by a wide variety of people. One of the papers that was honored with a Pulitzer Prize last week was a family-owned 2-day-a-week paper in a little town in Iowa. I can't remember the name of it now. Storm Lake, maybe. My mom's from Iowa, but I don't know my Iowa geography very well. But the press is still free in this country, as free as it's ever been. To Mr. Oppenheimer's point, there are always gives and takes and relationships and backs and forths. People like to think we get accused all the time of being in John Cranley's pocket. If people had my cell phone logs and see how much time in 2 years here as editor I spent on the phone with the mayor, that was because he was happy with us. Compared to 21 and a half, 22 years working in Portland, when City Hall was a block from the office, I've spent more time talking to John Cranley in 2 years here than I spent talking to 4 mayors and 3 mayors in Portland in 21 and a half years. So, yes, there are relationships with government. Yes, there are always issues about getting information and finding the truth and so on. But yeah, we're still free. I mean, when you look at the press in the rest of the world and so much of the rest of the world, it's still remarkable here. Is it a difficult time? Is it a weird time? Absolutely. I've been very critical in some of my writings and in talks about the Washington Press Corps and the way they're covering the Trump administration. They're not paying attention to the important things. I don't care about the tweet this morning about North Korea or whatever it was. I care about, really more important issues like the changes in regulations, the downsizing of the EPA. Our foreign policy is certainly is important, and that's evolving. Obviously, immigration is an incredible hot button right now. And when we write stories about immigration, people actually cancel because they don't want to read about the controversies around immigration, which I think is a shame, because we're all immigrants of one sort, except for the Native Americans. We all trace our roots to other parts of the world. And as I said, my father came over and came to this country in 1949. And so we have the ability. Yeah, is it more difficult because of the way this administration is acting differently than past administrations? Yeah. So get over it. Just do your jobs. Report. Excuse me. My friend Jay Rosen, who's a journalism professor at NYU, wrote a piece recently about this could be good for the press because they've got to report from the outside in as compared from the inside out. And you know, because now everything's not happening necessarily in the press room of the White House. And that's not a bad thing. So I still feel, I don't feel good about the overall state of what I've talked about, but I feel good about freedom of the press.
Peter,
I'm sorry.
could you comment on the relationship with Gannett and how much daily interaction you have with their people?
With Gannett, our parent company?
Yes.
Sure. I mean, you know, we're part of a huge company, 109 properties, I think, in this country, plus some in Britain. And part of my job is I'm also the Ohio editor for the state. We have 10 other newspapers in Ohio, ranging from Port Clinton on Lake Erie to Chillicothe. Chillicothe's become actually one of my favorite places in the state. I just think it's a cool little town. I know it's got its problems, but it's, yeah, exactly. And it's actually been a great opportunity for me to get around the state. I've spent a lot of time in Lancaster, Zanesville, Mansfield, Newark, and so on, as well as, of course, having to be in Columbus a lot for various and sundry things. So part of my job is helping organize the content and excuse me, the operations of those papers. I'm also a regional editor for Gannett, which means that well, it means I'm responsible for the state, but also have some broad coverage responsibilities. I'm responsible for a national team covering issues around guns, police community relations, and things like that, although, frankly, I have to admit we haven't done much because I've been so busy in Cincinnati. But we are part of a big company that has influences on us in a number of ways. You know, whether it's budgetary, cooperating on national projects, and so on. You know, nobody tells us what to do. You know, people always say, well, you did this because Gannett Corporate told you to do it. I've never had anybody tell me what to do with a story or what to do with an editorial or what to do with, you know, how I deploy my reporters and so on.
Thank you. Question.
Hi, my name is Roslyn, and I am an aide to Cincinnati City Council member Charlie Winburn.
Right.
And
I remember meeting you at the Tea Party meeting.
Yes, and I didn't get an answer to my question, so I was going to ask about this headline, FBI seizes boxes from Councilmember Winburn, because I remember at the time this story broke in the print version, a lot of the broadcast media picked it up and actually used stock footage of people in FBI vests. This was really not what happened. So I wanted to find out from you why the editorial decision was made to frame that story in that way.
As far as I know, that story is completely truthful. If you have information otherwise, I wish you would have shared it before now.
Well, no, but the
FBI did take the boxes out of City Hall. There's no question about that.
What?
Didn't the FBI take the boxes?
No, they never came to Mr. Winburn's office.
No, they were taken out of a closet or a basement or something, but that's not what the FBI told us, as far as I recall. If there's some factual error there, you know, as I said the other day, you should tell us about it.
Well, no, you didn't say anything to me at the Tea Party. That's why I'm bringing it up now.
I think I said the exact thing I just said.
That it was taken out of Mr. Winburn's office, and
that's not what the story says, as I recall. They were taken from wherever they were taken to, in the basement or whatever it was. I don't know the specifics. It was a while ago. As far as I know, the story is accurate. If it's not, then somebody should tell us.
Let's take some more questions. Here's one right over here. Would you say person?
My name is Tony. I love history. A gentleman named Jefferson said he had to choose between government and a free press. He would choose the press being more important. And what terrifies me is giving away my age, I guess. The press totally did the contrast of when Roosevelt was president. Nobody knew he was in a wheelchair. They hid the fact But yet, when Ronald Reagan had a colonoscopy, they wanted to know all about the, what are they?
Polyps?
Polyps.
Yeah.
The contrast
I
is
really
amazing.
didn't.
Now,
I
what
really
I'm-
didn't want to know about it myself.
I don't.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, you've been around 42 years, and you teach this subject. How fast is it headed, like an airplane in a power guide, and what happens when it hits bottom?
Yeah, I don't
Which
think
we got to be close.
No,
I don't
it's
get
really,
any tingle up my leg at all.
It really isn't. I mean, the thing you have to, the perspective you, at least from my perspective, that's so important is that the world has changed so dramatically. Mr. Oppenheimer is a journalist now, and because he's got his site and he's got his blog and he can write whatever he wants, and the Constitution protects him, and that's a good thing. And there are countless bloggers, websites, and all manner of things, because anybody can call themselves a journalist. All you need is a laptop, and and there's, I mean, I've been asked at times when I was in Oregon, city council asked us to support their contention that a local blogger who was kind of a pain in the butt to them wasn't a journalist, so they could kick him out of meetings. And I said, I'm not going to do that. Same First Amendment protects that guy as protects me. And, that's just not the way it should be. Has it changed journalism? Has it added a level of, call it what you will, crassness to it? Yeah. But I think the vast majority of people, whether they went to USC or not, who are working in daily journalism today are still honorable people who are trying to do the best work that they can.
Another question.
Excuse me, my name's Dan, and I was wondering if you could comment on the, as far as, the polarization of society and the way it's, what do you see the end result is continuing on, getting worse, and where that might lead? And I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and do you have any inside information the rest of us hadn't heard about the Pike County killings?
About which, the Pike County killing? No, I don't. I think we're all sort of mystified. I've joked that the Attorney General better solve the case pretty soon because he's running for governor. But that aside, I really don't have any intelligence. It seems to be a local case. Remember, there was the drug cartel stuff that sort of surfaced for about 2 days and then went away. Because some of them had marijuana grows on their property. But they had a press conference the other day and said they're closer. That's good. Let's solve the case.
Peter, the Attorney General will be with us at our last event
saw
this
that.
year on
Yeah.
June 7th. So what is his basis for withholding the autopsy results? Briefly, I want to get a couple more questions in.
It's a difference of opinion on the law. The counselor probably more expert than I am on it, but we believe that the law says very specifically that autopsy reports are public record. The AG and the sheriff and others are arguing that there's an ongoing investigation, therefore they don't have to release them. And that's a difference of legal opinion that the court will resolve.
I'm going to send my sleuths back there at EmpowerU and tell them to contact Attorney General DeWine to please bring those autopsy reports on June 7th, okay?
I'll show up with my iPhone.
If you would please do that, we'll make sure we get you a copy.
Thank
okay?
you. I appreciate it.
Let's take a couple more questions.
My name is Nick Miller, and I have a lot of things I'd like to say, but I'm not going to take time to say them all right now, obviously. One of the things I want to say is that I've been an Enquirer for the last 50 years.
Appreciate that.
And, I used to really love the Enquirer. I'm really sad to see what it's become. What's happened here in this country in the last 50 years is that news reporting in general, especially on the broadcast news and the Enquirer too, and national, any kind of national news, has basically changed. There isn't any bias anymore, actually. I used to think there was a lot of bias there, but there's not. What you publish mostly is mass media propaganda. It's socialist propaganda. Now, there are some stories that you publish that are, straightforward and good stories about conservative people. I saw one a few weeks ago, about Jane Timken that was actually a fairly objective story. I saw
that was
one.
a nice story. That was a nice story.
Yeah, and I saw one about Chris Monzello a while back, a few months back. That was actually a good story. There are a couple others here and there. But, I think having a few of those stories, I was very glad to see those. But, that's just like a small amount of what's.
In the interest of time, could you ask a question, please, if you have one?
I'm just, I just wonder why there's a constant drumbeat, against our immigration laws, constant drumbeat against anything that's conservative, and this whole basically.
So let me ask you a question. You really think we're publishing socialist propaganda?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
With all respect, I think that's utter nonsense. And I'm not meaning that personally critically. I read every word we report. And who's the student? You're the student of history. There's nothing socialist about what we're doing. No, seriously, I'm serious. I mean, then you really need to understand what socialism is. We're not advocating for socialism. After all, we're a profit-making capitalist institution. Why would we want to tear down the very society that makes money for us, that pays my salary, that put my son and daughter through college? It doesn't make any sense. And we're not. We may be slightly insane at times, but we're not impractical. So, I mean, with all respect, I respect your point of view, and especially your right to say it, but we're not socialists.
And one question here, and then I just have one question I want to ask, and this will be the last question.
My name is Diane. I think you kind of overstated the case. I've been reading Cincinnati Enquirer for a long time as well. My perception is that about 5 to 7 years ago, a lot of the conservative reporters and editors were fired, and people from outside Cincinnati were brought in. And I know Mark Twain said something about
yeah, it's a great quote.
Cincinnati.
Well, he said when the end of the world comes, he wants to be in Cincinnati because it's 10 years behind the times.
Right.
Which maybe.
So anybody from outside of Cincinnati, probably for being a local people who are from Cincinnati, are there any native Cincinnati?
Most of our staff are either native Cincinnatians or native Ohioans, some from northern Kentucky, of course. Most of the staff, that's the case. And a lot of people have been here. A lot of them went to UC and stayed, that sort of thing. So yes, a very high percentage.
So
I don't know the exact percentage because I don't know where everybody's from, frankly, but.
Thank you. So Peter, if we could kind of just sum up the results from our project before the election, what you're saying, if I could sum up your words and you can tell me if I'm saying it wrong, is that because we all have bias, our approach to looking at these numbers incorporated our own bias, and we just weren't looking at the information correctly.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I don't doubt your math, for example. You said you stood there and watched people measure it, so I don't doubt that. But there's, I mean, it's ironic, I suppose, on some level. You accuse us of bias. Then you go out and create an instrument to.
I don't think we accused you. We try to kind of cut it down the middle. You and I have had that conversation and try to report both sides.
But any instrument that you design is inherently biased on its own. I would argue that what the content says, which is much harder to judge or grade, is much more important than the number of column inches. And down the stretch, we were so careful about making sure, well, we were careful all through the fall, but down the stretch, and arguably because they were here so much, well, both candidates were here so much, so never mind about that, but between Pence and Trump and Hillary and Bill and other surrogates on both sides of the aisle, we were drowning in candidates through the fall, which is one of the great things, one of the reasons I wanted to come to Ohio, actually, because I was looking forward to this campaign so much. Yeah, as a political junkie, it's like heaven. So, is it okay if I answer that?
Yes.
The editorial board evaluated both candidates very, very carefully and unanimously decided Hillary was the better choice.
Okay, we've got to wrap it up, and I know Peter might stay for a minute. Real quick, Peter, does everybody in the room on our attendance list tonight get one free letter to the editor? What's your name? So make sure you're registered. We're going to send Peter a list. So I really, we've had several conversations, Peter, and I really just appreciate you coming tonight.
Well, it's my
Can
pleasure.
we give him a round of applause?
Thank you.
For
Thank you
coming.
all.
And thank you very much, Peter.
Yep, you bet.
And real quick, Dr. Jay Rissover's in the crowd tonight. Could you just do a 2-minute promo about what you're going to talk about on May 2nd?
So I'll be talking about, not at my request as usual, I've been asked to talk about weight and weight reduction. I'm going to go through fads, diets, surgeries, and I forgot medications. It's not on the list, but I figure that's a big part of it. So talking about some of the science behind it, some of the facts, and throwing a lot of humor as I always do. So please come and lose weight.
Great session. And that's on May the 2nd. So in the spirit of fairness, I really appreciate Peter coming and hope you can use this for absolutely for a good cause at the Enquirer. And let's thank him again for coming tonight. And we really appreciate it. Hope to see you at our next session next week.